So I'm a douchey college student, and I was busy batting my eyes at communism when I came across this video. So here I'm going to clearly state why this kind of libertarian propaganda doesn't make sense. Ron Paul, with all his strengths and his honesty and his anti-imperialism aside, that doesn't mean anyone needs to swallow his ideology whole. Part of the problem with this kind of rhetoric is that it assumes that every state is the same. Yeah, obviously, no state is ideal. No state is going to send you ice cream in the mail. And that's why you can never trust a state to limit itself, like telling it to follow the Constitution and assuming so naively that it will, or even assuming that if they did follow the Constitution, that that would create some kind of, libertarian ideal world, and then no one would be screwed. The underlying assumption here is that anything other than capitalism is a form of theft and stealing, but the problem is capitalism itself is a form of theft. Instead of having a benevolent king, what you have are lots and lots of shitty kings, and you basically tell the people that if you don't like bending over and sucking this king's dick, you can quit your job and go suck the other king's dick. No matter where you go, no matter who you work for, a bunch of your money is going to get stolen from you. It doesn't matter if you're a wage worker, a factory worker, in a sweatshop, or even like someone in high tech that does R&D. No matter what, a significant portion of whatever it is that you're contributing to a collective project is going to be taken away from you. But instead of it being taken away by excessive taxes or just government theft, instead it's legally entitled to whoever it is that owns the business you're working at. And so that's essentially shareholders. They get to essentially control all of the capital. That's the basic part of capitalism. And as a result, they get to hoard all of its profits, and you get a wage. And if you don't like it, you're basically competing with everyone else. Basically, by taking labor and workers and specialists and even managers and people like that, by divorcing them from any right to control the property that they're working on, by considering a factory to be the same as like a t-shirt and saying, well, they're both private property. Essentially, you create all of these tiny, small tyrannies inside each workplace. It's a tyrannical state. The thing is controlled by shareholders and their managers and the people who work under them. And if you don't like it, you have to go to another workplace where it's exactly the same. You basically pick between different dictatorships. No matter where you go, you get robbed. And no matter where you go, you're competing against other workers, and a huge portion of your money gets taken. In year 2000 alone, workers in America, which is just one country, did over $1 trillion in value added in manufacture. Value added in manufacturing is the basically amount that laborers contributed to the production, but they were only paid about $300 billion in wages. And depending on what industry you look at, it goes even smaller. That means they're not getting paid back for the amount that they're contributing. So that's a massive, massive theft. In terms of contrasting state capitalism with like genuine capitalism or whatever, this is complete mythology. America has never been a genuine capitalist state. You can go back to its foundings. Look at the railroad. Look at the massive development of its finance. Look at its westward expansion. It's never been this like constitutional utopia. It's always been a settler colonialist entity. It's always been a massive, massive state which was tied in with business and financial interests. And what those interests were changed over time, but it's never been that way. And as far as Hong Kong has never been that way either, technically. Hong Kong and all of the Asian tigers, all of them, they were successful not because they were capitalists and not because they were socialist or big government or whatever you want to call it. They were actually successful because they mixed the two. If you look over the economic record for Hong Kong, for South Korea, for Taiwan, for all of the places that we saw that developed, even for China technically, no denying China is a shithole, but it did develop significantly more than a lot of other countries over the last few decades. These countries didn't adopt capitalist doctrines. In fact, they were further away from capitalism than a lot of countries that just collapsed, like the ones in Latin America, which all of them took under massive debts. All of them ended up watching their quality of life drop significantly once they added capitalist reforms like privatization and deregulation. The closer countries came to this ideal utopian form of capitalism, the worse they did, the more likely they were to become unstable, the more likely quality of life was to collapse, and the less freedom people had generally. As far as identifying any forms of like excessive government as communist elements, that's just fucking retarded. I mean, any any government, depending on how you define what's too much, obviously for libertarians, it's anything past the Constitution. Um, then you can say that anything with big government is communist. Obviously, that's not true because communists like some forms of government over others. Communists don't like fascists. Communists didn't like the monarchy. Communists didn't like any of those things. But those are pretty big governments. And communists would probably point out that a capitalist state, even the ideal constitutional capitalist state, that's a form of big government too. It just, instead of directly engaging with government. Instead, it puts a lot of the responsibilities that other governments take on private owners. So instead of the state managing corporations, you have tiny little corporate states managing themselves. Um, so that's a huge commitment. When a state says we're going to have this massive police force and a military to protect the right of one group of people to basically exploit laborers, and if a worker even so much as tries to take some bread home from the store to feed his own family, even though he's the one working at the store or baking at the bakery, we will throw that guy in jail or slap him with a fine or something. That's a huge government. And the other problem with rhetoric about communism is anything with big government is it ignores what kind of government. It's not true that any excess of government is bad and evil. It's true that a capitalist state will generally do whatever it can to benefit capitalists. So that means things like corporate welfare to massive corporations. The larger capitalists are going to use it to go to war and to pursue imperialism. But the other things that the state does, it's misguided to say, well, oh, hey, welfare spending, that's just as bad too, because that's an excess of government, and that's just like the wars, and that's just like, corporate subsidies, and all welfare is bad. The reason it's stupid to say that is because those are counter hegemonic measures that the state took. Those aren't things that the state generally wants to do. The state doesn't want to give money to poor people or for their health care or anything like that. That's not something that the state will just like voluntarily do. That's something that happened because unions, working groups, workers, and basically even like revolutionary groups, not very big ones, but significantly sized ones, all through the Industrial Revolution, they were in the streets fighting. Some of them got bombed, they got hanged, they got shot. I'm talking about Haymarket people, the Wobblies, the long tradition America has had of revolutionary working class movements. And in order to cut deals with those movements, to basically water them down so that they didn't threaten the capitalist state altogether, they started doing things like regulating the workplace, regulating hours, giving them welfare benefits, bread and butter goals, or so they're called. So those things are different. Nobody has to die or fight for the government to give Halliburton, billions of dollars, for the government to look the other way when, BP destroys the Gulf, or for the government to stop investigating credit fraud. Nobody has to make the government do that. The government is owned by those capitalists. And you can see that because the way they've constructed the law is that owning capital is seen as a right, and it's seen as the same as owning a t-shirt. So clearly the state exists to protect people who own capital. So it's not surprising that they would take billions of tax dollars and just give them to corporations. On the other hand, when the state does the opposite, when it makes welfare spending, when it does those things, those are actually concessions. That's people corrupting the state. That's people pushing back against the state and forcing the state to say, hey, okay, we don't want to deal with a working class communist revolution. We don't want to deal with that. So we'll just make sure to slap some regulations on the corporations, and that way everyone wins. So not every form of big government should be considered communism, and communism is only the advocacy for workers that pushes the state towards those working class interests. It's not like any excess of government, like corporate subsidies, can be called capitalist or it could be called communist because corporate subsidies don't go to the workers; they go to capitalists, they go to private owners. So it's obviously not communism. Um, but yeah, I think that more or less sums up why this kind of analysis is retarded. It basically takes libertarianism and capitalism and says anything that isn't what we're advocating is part of this giant, evil philosophy called communism, and we better make sure to keep it at bay by only supporting the Constitution. It defines itself in its own terms, so it's not. It doesn't really make any sense.